We saw rebel forces go into Tartus yesterday. The state of the base still a little bit unclear, but I think it's probably fair to say that if you're wanting to hold on to those assets, the air base, there are other Russian military bases in Syria too.
Mm.
Giving exile and refuge to Assad may not be the smartest move in the book
Yes.
because if you're going to negotiate with Assad's successors, the fact you're harboring, looking after him at home, letting him join the smart country clubs in Moscow isn't the best possible look. So, it would look to me like it's a knee-jerk calculation made in Moscow, probably because Assad can't find anywhere else to go,
Mm.
and Russia feeling it should repay its loyalty. But I think listeners will know how loyalty to the regime in Moscow has played out over the last few years. So, Assad should probably stay away from high-rise buildings and open windows.
The fall of the 50-year-long Assad family regime comes at a time of unprecedented insecurity in the Middle East. Less than 18 months after October the 7th, which has drawn Iranian resources to militia groups in Lebanon and Gaza. Iran's primary supporter, Russia, has spent almost 3 years funneling its military resources into a war with Ukraine. So what will HTS's success mean for the wider region? Let's speak to Peter Frankopan, Professor of Global History at Oxford University. Good morning to you.
Morning, Asma.
Why do you think this happened? How much of this was down to a lack of support from Russia?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think that the right answer is autocracies are extremely vulnerable and can topple extremely quickly. I think that one of the challenges is that we're used to, in this country, seeing institutions which are quite robust, regardless of who our prime minister might be one day or the next. The country keeps the wheels on the road. I think that the challenges in states which are dominated from the top down, there can be small cracks in the glass that then shatter the whole screen very, very fast. So the speed of this is quick, a bit like what we saw with Afghanistan, a bit like what we saw with Libya over the course of the last decade. I think in that world, what Russia, even Iran, other local leaders, rivals, allies can do is fairly minimal because it's more about how momentum gets going and then trying to put the genie back in the bottle. And what's happened, I think, in Syria, the speed of it's a surprise insofar it's quite hard to predict when these things happen. But the way in which support for a regime suddenly melts away is a classic case of what happens when autocracies fail.
Yeah, I'll come back to Syria in a minute and what's what the government is going to look like and what this is going to mean for Syrian people who are mostly seem to be rejoicing in a minute. Let's just talk about Russia and Iran if we can. For Russia, I mean, they've got this air base there. What do you think is your best bet of how they'll be able to access that, how they'll be able to work with the new Syrian government?
Well, a lot's going to happen where the dust settles. I mean, there's an important Russian air base. I think probably even more important is a Russian naval base at Tartus, which has been a Russian or Soviet asset since the 1970s and was partly the price of Moscow's support for the Assad family for the last 50 years. That base is, not a first order magnitude possession for the Russians, but it's an incredibly important foothold that Russia has in the Eastern Mediterranean that allows it to have influence in the Middle East. It allows it to have influence in North Africa. Russia's very active in Libya. And over the course of the last 7 or 8 years, Russia's increasingly active in other parts of Africa too. So keeping possession of that base is important. We saw rebel forces go into Tartus yesterday. The state of the base still a little bit unclear. But I think it's probably fair to say that if you're wanting to hold on to those assets, the air base, there are other Russian military bases in Syria too. Giving exile and refuge to Assad may not be the smartest move in the book because if you're going to negotiate with Assad's successors, the fact you're harboring, looking after him at home, letting him join the smart country clubs in Moscow isn't the best possible look. So, it would look to me like it's a knee-jerk calculation made in Moscow, probably because Assad can't find anywhere else to go, and Russia feeling it should repay its loyalty. But I think listeners will know how loyalty to the regime in Moscow has played out over the last few years. So, Assad should probably stay away from high-rise buildings and open windows.
Oh, God, goodness me. What about Iran then? What are the repercussions for Iran from what has happened in Syria?
Well, I'd have thought that the smarts in Tehran will be trying to work out, do they double down? Their hand has been very significantly weakened over the course of the last year and a half since the 7th of October attacks on Israel. Iran, I think, was quite convinced that the alliances that it had built, the supply chains, the network that was targeting Israel through Hamas, through Hezbollah, through other proxies in the region, gave Iran an opportunity to deliver some form of meaningful change, perhaps. And that looks like it's gone even more badly wrong than Russia's strategy in Syria. So now the degradation of Hezbollah as an organization, Iran's own targeting within Damascus over the course of the last 24 hours by both by rebels, but also by Israeli jets taking out Syrian military assets, means I think that Iran has a very difficult decision now about whether it goes all in or whether, in fact, it reckons it's next on the menu and probably should be thinking quite hard about how to make conciliatory noises towards the West. And I think, if listeners know one thing, it's a really bad position where you've got two difficult choices to make. And so I think Iran, to some extent, is not the master of its own destiny in the coming weeks. But a lot will depend on what happens in Damascus over the course of the coming weeks and months.
And how optimistic are you, very briefly? Some people are saying, well, let's give these guys a chance. And other people are saying, no, no, no. They used to be an affiliate of Al Qaeda. Briefly, how optimistic are you for the Syrian people?
Well, it's been a joy seeing people being sprung from prison, singing in the streets and chanting at the end of autocracy. I mean, I should remind listeners that in 2021, Assad won the presidential election with 95% of the vote, about 13 million ballots cast in his favor out of a possible population of 10 million. People's liberation is wonderful to watch. I think the cold, sober reality is that the patchwork of individuals, of groups who are going to vie for power are going to need a lot of thought, a lot of help, and a lot of prayer from outside. And because this is a Syrian people's decision of how they structure themselves. But one of the challenges will be how to invest in rebuilding infrastructure in Syria, and that requires money. And it doesn't look to me that it's going to come from the United States. It doesn't look to me it's going to come from Russia or from the EU. So that's a tricky position to be in. So I'd like to be hopeful, but reality and experience tells me that these are going to be a difficult coming months and years ahead.
Peter, thank you. Peter Frankopan, who is, of course, Professor of Global History at the University of Oxford.